Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display in her office at the Galactic Cultural Institute, watching as thousands of data points shifted and swirled. 20 years of anthropological research across the Harmonious Federation's 37-member species coalesced into patterns that made her blood run cold. "Computer, overlay historical analysis pattern Delta 7, she commanded. The display flickered, and a new layer of data appeared. Earth's own sociological metrics from the decades preceding its 3 world wars. The correlation was undeniable. Sarah had spent her career studying how different species handled conflict resolution. The Federation prided itself on having evolved beyond violence, beyond the need for military forces. They pointed to humanity's warrior past with a mixture of pity and disdain. But now she was seeing the same subtle shifts that had preceded Earth's darkest hours: increased resource hoarding, subtle changes in artistic expressions, shifts in educational priorities. The difference was that the Federation had no concept of these warning signs. They'd never experienced total war. Their history books didn't contain chapters about the price of unpreparedness. Sarah compiled her findings and sent them to the Federation Council with a priority marker. The response came within hours. "Dear Dr. Chen, while we appreciate Earth's unique perspective on conflict, we find no cause for concern in normal cultural evolution. Perhaps your species' history makes you oversensitive to perceived threats." She read the dismissal twice, then opened a secure channel to Earth's Defense Command. Admiral Torres' weathered face appeared on her screen. "Dr. Chen, this is unexpected. Admiral, remember when you asked me to watch for certain patterns? They're here, all of them. The Federation isn't just shifting, it's preparing. They don't even realize they're doing it, but every metric I'm tracking matches pre-war social patterns." The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "You're certain?" Sarah sent her data through the secure channel. "The Federation sees peace as the natural state of civilization. They think violence is something species evolve past. They don't understand that peace is something you must actively maintain. Like muscles," Torres mused. "Use them or lose them." The Federation forgot how to recognize threats because they convinced themselves threats no longer exist. Exactly. And now something's changing. The Federation's member species are unconsciously preparing for conflict, but they have no framework to recognize what's happening. It's like watching sleepwalkers arm themselves. Torres studied the data in silence. Finally, he looked up. "You understand what happens if you're right. If I'm right, the Federation is headed toward its first major conflict in centuries, and they've systematically dismantled every defense mechanism they once had. They're not just vulnerable, they're blind to the possibility of vulnerability. And if you're wrong, Earth appears paranoid and militaristic, confirming every stereotype about our species." Sarah squared her shoulders. "Admiral, I've spent my career studying how civilizations handle conflict. The patterns are clear. We can either worry about looking paranoid, or we can prepare for what's coming." Torres nodded slowly. "I'll activate Protocol Sentinel. Quietly. We'll need your continued observations. Watch for any acceleration in the patterns. The Federation Council won't listen to further warnings. They've already dismissed me as another war-obsessed human." "Let them," Torres said grimly. "Humanity learned its lessons about peace and war through blood and fire. If the Federation won't learn from our experience, they'll learn from their own. But we'll be ready to help pick up the pieces." Sarah turned back to her data display. Somewhere in the peaceful Federation, ancient instincts were stirring. Species that thought they'd evolved beyond conflict were unconsciously preparing for it. And humanity, the galaxy's designated warmongers, might be the only civilization prepared to preserve the peace. "Computer, begin new analysis sequence," she commanded. "Track Federation military installation repurposing rates. Flag any patterns matching Earth historical database, years 2035 through 2042. The computer hummed to life as Sarah settled in for a long night. Humanity had been called many things: aggressive, paranoid, obsessed with conflict. But they had learned, through millennia of warfare, that peace wasn't the absence of violence. Peace was the constant vigilance against it. And now, that hard-won wisdom might be the galaxy's only hope. Captain Maya Patil walked through the supposedly decommissioned lunar defense base, her footsteps echoing off walls that were far from abandoned. Behind carefully maintained historical exhibit signs and museum pieces, Earth's most advanced defense systems hummed quietly, waiting. Status report. She called out to her crew, who were disguised as museum maintenance staff. The Federation Tourism Board had praised Earth's commitment to preserving its primitive military history as educational exhibits. If they'd looked closer, they might have noticed that these exhibits were in surprisingly good working order. All systems nominal. Captain, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his hands moving across a console labeled Ancient Targeting Computer, Non-Functional Display Model. The holographic readouts showed the positions of every Federation ship within 50 light-years. Stealth systems are maintaining full coverage. As far as the Federation's concerned, we're just another bunch of humans obsessing over our violent past. Maya smiled grimly. Dr. Chen's warnings had set Protocol Sentinel in motion 3 months ago. Now, across human space and beyond, carefully hidden preparations were underway. Every museum ship was fully armed and crewed. Every historical site concealed state-of-the-art defense systems. Every cultural preservation officer was a trained military operative. Her comm unit chimed. Captain, incoming transmission from Admiral Torres. The Admiral's hologram appeared in her office. Captain Patel, how's the museum business? Thriving, sir. We had a Federation cultural delegation through yesterday. They were very impressed by our quaint attachment to military history. Did they notice anything unusual? No, sir. They were too busy feeling superior about having evolved past the need for defense forces. One of them actually patted me on the head and said it was admirable how we preserve these reminders of our violent nature. Torres's expression darkened. Dr. Chen's latest report indicates the pattern acceleration is continuing. The Federation's unconscious preparation for conflict is speeding up. We're seeing stockpiling of key resources, strategic repositioning of civilian ships, and increased production of dual-use technologies. And they still don't see it. They can't see it. They've convinced themselves that conflict is impossible between evolved species. They've forgotten that peace isn't a destination you reach. It's a garden you have to tend. Maya nodded. She'd studied Earth's military history extensively. Every major conflict had been preceded by people claiming that war was impossible, that humanity had moved past such things. Those claims had always been proven tragically wrong. New orders, sir. Accelerate the training program. I want every human installation ready to shift from museum to active defense within 30 minutes. And Maya. He paused. Be careful with the Federation observers. We need them to keep believing we're just paranoid humans playing with our old war toys. Understood, sir. Though I have to admit, it's getting harder to smile and nod when they lecture us about evolving beyond violence. Consider it combat training, Captain. Sometimes the hardest battle is keeping your mouth shut when someone's being an idiot. Torres's hologram flickered out. Maya turned to her crew. All right, people, let's run another historical reenactment. Full combat drill. But remember, as far as any observers are concerned, we're just enthusiastic history buffs playing with antiques. As her crew moved into position, Maya studied the tactical display. Somewhere out there, the Federation was sleepwalking toward conflict, blind to the dangers they'd forgotten how to see. And humanity, the supposedly primitive warriors, might be the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. Begin drill, she ordered. Around her, the museum transformed into what it really was, one of the most advanced military installations in known space. The Federation might mock humanity's inability to forget war, but they'd never understood a crucial truth. Those who forget war are doomed to relearn its lessons the hard way. Humanity hadn't forgotten. They'd remembered, prepared, and waited. And if Dr. Chen was right, that preparation might soon be all that stood between the galaxy and catastrophe. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice cut through her thoughts. "Captain, the Federation Cultural Delegation has requested another tour. They want to study our fascinating primitive warfare exhibits in more detail." Maya smiled tightly. "Tell them we'd be delighted to share our historical perspective. And Rodriguez, make sure the non-functional systems are properly concealed this time. We wouldn't want to spoil their anthropological studies of our quaint warrior culture." The first sign that Dr. Chen's predictions were correct came not with a bang, but with silence. Federation communications channels began going dark one by one, each failure dismissed as technical difficulties. But Sarah Chen and Maya Patel, watching from their respective posts, recognized the pattern. It was beginning. Confirmation from Sector 7. Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his voice tense. 3 more Federation trading posts have gone silent. No distress calls, no emergency broadcasts. They just stopped. Maya stood in the command center of her museum, now fully activated as the military installation it had always been. Track the pattern of communications failures. Compare it to historical analysis pattern Omega. The holographic display shifted, overlaying the current outages with a classic military strategy, one humanity had used centuries ago. Cut communications first, isolate targets, then strike. "Admiral Torres," Maya called through the secure channel. "We're seeing it. All human installations are seeing it, Captain," Torres replied grimly. "The Federation's own monitoring systems are calling it a series of technical malfunctions. They still can't recognize a military strategy when it's being used against them." Dr. Chen's face appeared in another window of the communication grid. The social patterns just spiked. Fear responses across Federation space, but their leadership is suppressing it. They're literally unable to process what's happening. Their belief in their own evolution beyond conflict is so strong that they're rationalizing everything. A new alert flashed across Maya's screen. Federation ships were moving, but not in their usual trade patterns. They were forming up, though their crews might not even realize it. Ancient instincts were taking over, driving actions their conscious minds couldn't comprehend. "How long?" Maya asked. "Hours at most," Sarah replied. "The pattern is accelerating exponentially now. When it breaks." She never finished the sentence. Across Federation space, the carefully maintained facade of eternal peace shattered. Ships that had been disguised as trading vessels revealed weapon systems. Civilian installations transformed into military strongpoints. Species that had claimed to be beyond violence launched coordinated attacks against their neighbors. But humanity was ready. "Execute Protocol Sentinel," Admiral Torres commanded across all human channels. "All installations activate. All ships deploy. Protection of civilian populations is primary objective." Maya's museum shed its disguise completely. Defense systems that the Federation had dismissed as historical curiosities powered up to full capacity. Across human space, similar transformations were taking place. Every mock-up, every display piece, every preserved relic revealed its true nature. Federation representatives watching from Earth's orbital stations stared in shock as humanity's supposed backwardness was revealed as careful preparation. The museums were fortresses. The historical sites were bunkers. The primitive warriors had been vigilant guardians all along. Multiple Federation civilian ships requesting emergency assistance, Rodriguez reported. They're under attack from their own defense forces. The automated systems they thought were decommissioned have reactivated with original military protocols. "Guide them to our emergency shelters," Maya ordered. "All human ships, implement defensive formation Delta. We've drilled for this." On her screens, Maya watched as human vessels moved with practiced precision, forming protective screens around civilian populations, both human and Federation. The strategies they'd rehearsed as historical reenactments were now being executed for real. "Message from Federation Council." Sarah's voice came through. uptight with controlled emotion. They're requesting. They're requesting human military assistance. They admit they don't know how to handle what's happening. Admiral Torres's response was immediate. Tell them humanity stands ready to help. We've been ready all along. Maya watched as more Federation ships appeared on her tactical display, their weapons active, their crews driven by instincts they'd denied for generations. But they faced an opponent they hadn't counted on, a species that had never forgotten how to fight, or why it was sometimes necessary. All units, she commanded, execute protection protocols. Show them why humanity never forgot the art of war, because sometimes you need warriors to preserve the peace. Around her, humanity's hidden strength was revealed at last. They had been called primitive, paranoid, unable to evolve beyond violence. Now, those same qualities might be all that stood between civilization and chaos. The final battle for peace was beginning, and humanity was ready to prove why they had never chosen to forget their warrior past. The battle for Federation space unfolded like a dark mirror of humanity's own military history. Wave after wave of automated defense systems, awakened from their supposed decommissioning, turned against their former masters. But where the Federation saw chaos, humanity saw patterns and knew how to counter them. Defensive grid holding at 87%, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported from his station. Human vessels are successfully protecting civilian evacuation corridors in all major sectors. Maya watched as her ships executed maneuvers that had been perfected through centuries of human conflict. Each formation, each tactical response, drew from lessons written in Earth's blood. Now those same lessons were saving lives across the galaxy. Admiral Torres, she called through the command channel. Federation refugee ships are reporting successful docking at all designated safe harbors. Our museum facilities are proving quite effective as emergency shelters. Well done, Captain, Torres replied. Dr. Chen, status update. Sarah's hologram appeared, her expression focused. The Federation's leadership is finally beginning to understand. They're seeing their own history clearly for the first time. All the wars they'd rewritten as cultural misunderstandings. All the weapons they'd relabeled as peacekeeping tools. The cognitive dissonance is breaking down. A new alert flashed across Maya's tactical display. A group of Federation civilian ships was caught between two waves of automated attackers. Without hesitation, she directed her forces to respond. All ships, execute Thermopylae protocol, she commanded. Human vessels moved into position, creating a defensive wall between the attackers and their civilian targets. It was a maneuver that had been used countless times in Earth's history, a smaller force holding ground to protect the vulnerable. Federation Council is watching this defense pattern with particular interest, Sarah noted. They're starting to recognize that what they dismissed as humanity's primitive combat obsession was actually a sophisticated understanding of protection strategies. The battle continued across space, but a pattern was emerging. Wherever human ships engaged, order began to return. Their outdated tactical knowledge proved perfect for countering the automated systems that were running on similar ancient protocols. Message from Federation Science Council, Rodriguez announced. They're asking for access to our historical military databases to understand what's happening. Maya allowed herself a small smile. Grant them access to the tactical analysis section. Let them see what they've been missing. On shared channels, Federation analysts watched in amazement as humanity's military archives predicted and explained every move the rogue defense systems were making. Patterns that had seemed like random chaos to them were clear strategic decisions to human observers. Multiple Federation ships requesting combat guidance, Rodriguez reported. They want to learn how to fight. Pair them with our vessels, Maya ordered. Basic defense formations first. Show them what we've been practicing in our historical reenactments. Across Federation space, human ships began teaching their alien counterparts the basics of combat maneuvers. The species that had proudly proclaimed themselves evolved beyond violence were now eagerly learning from the warriors they had mocked. Federation Council is formally requesting human military leadership in this crisis, Admiral Torres announced. They acknowledge that our paranoid preparation has saved countless lives. Sarah's hologram nodded. The social patterns are shifting again, but this time it's different. They're not just accepting the necessity of military readiness, they're beginning to understand what we've been trying to tell them all along. And what's that, Doctor? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. That peace isn't the absence of violence. It's the wisdom to know how to prevent it, the strength to defend against it, and the courage to face it when necessary. On Maya's tactical display, more Federation ships were joining the defensive formations, learning from human examples. The tide was turning. The automated systems, designed for attack but not adaptation, couldn't match the flexibility of conscious, trained defenders. All ships, Maya commanded, prepare for final containment phase. Let's show the Federation why humanity never forgot how to fight, because sometimes the best way to preserve peace is to remember war. The battle wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. Humanity's supposedly primitive warrior culture had become the galaxy's best defense against chaos. And perhaps more importantly, they were teaching others how to defend themselves without losing their civilized nature. The Federation was learning what humanity had known all along, that true peace comes not from denying the possibility of conflict, but from being prepared to face it. 3 months after the crisis, Dr. Sarah Chen stood once again before the Federation Council. But this time, the chamber was different. Military advisors, both human and Federation, flanked the council members. Status displays showed defense readiness levels. The peaceful facade had been replaced by vigilant awareness. Dr. Chen, council leader Vax began, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. Your latest cultural analysis report makes for fascinating reading. Would you share your conclusions with the full council? Sarah nodded, activating her holographic display. The Federation is undergoing its most significant cultural shift in recorded history. But unlike the pattern that led to the crisis, this change is conscious and deliberate. The display showed scenes from across Federation space. Former trade stations now house both commercial and defense facilities. Ships carried cargo alongside defensive capabilities. More significantly, Federation youth were enrolling in Earth's military academies, eager to learn what their own civilization had forgotten. The Federation's decision to eliminate all military knowledge nearly proved catastrophic. Sarah continued, "You didn't just decommission your weapons, you forgot why they existed in the first place. You lost the wisdom that thousands of years of conflict had taught your ancestors." Captain Maya Patel, now serving as Earth's military liaison to the Federation, stepped forward. "But you're learning quickly. The joint defense exercises have shown remarkable progress. Federation species are rediscovering their own forgotten military histories, integrating them with human tactical knowledge." Admiral Torres's hologram appeared, joining the discussion. The new combined fleet demonstrations have exceeded expectations. Federation ships are proving quite capable once their crews understand basic combat principles. It turns out the capacity for defense was never lost, just buried. But more importantly, Sarah added, "You're learning what humanity never forgot, that being prepared for war doesn't make you warlike. Understanding violence doesn't make you violent. Sometimes, the most peaceful civilizations are the ones best prepared to defend that peace." Council leader Vax stood, his silver robes now bearing the new insignia of the Federation Defense Council. "We owe humanity an apology. We mocked you as primitive warriors, unable to evolve beyond violence. We didn't understand that you had evolved, not by forgetting war, but by remembering it wisely." The chamber's displays showed scenes from the new reality. Human instructors teaching Federation species about defensive strategies, joint patrols maintaining peace in contested regions, and former museum ships now proudly serving alongside newly commissioned Federation vessels. The greatest lesson, Maya observed, wasn't about fighting at all. It was about balance. You can be both peaceful and prepared. You can hope for the best while being ready for the worst. That's what humanity learned through our long history of warfare. And that's what we're honored to share with the Federation. Sarah's data showed the final analysis: crime rates down, border disputes resolved peacefully, and potential conflicts deterred by the mere presence of the combined fleet. The Federation had found a new equilibrium, not in denial of their capacity for conflict, but in wisdom about how to prevent it. We're establishing the first Federation Military History and Defense Academy, VAX announced, and we would be honored if Earth would take the lead in curriculum development. Your species' long experience with both war and peace makes you uniquely qualified to teach this balance. Admiral Torres smiled. We would be proud to help. After all, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, but those who remember it wisely are empowered to prevent its darkest chapters from recurring. As the council session concluded, Sarah watched Federation and human officers discussing joint patrol schedules. The galaxy had changed. The Federation had learned that true civilization wasn't about pretending to be above violence. It was about being wise enough to prevent it, strong enough to deter it, and prepared enough to face it when necessary. Humanity's warrior heritage, long dismissed as primitive, had proved to be sophisticated wisdom in disguise. They had never forgotten war precisely because they valued peace so highly. And now, that understanding was spreading across the galaxy, creating not just peace, but the strength to preserve it. The Federation had finally learned what humanity had known all along. Sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who work hardest for peace, and the most civilized societies are those wise enough to remember their primitive roots.